Um, the next element is this reduction of corruption and bribery, substantially reduce corruption and bribery in all their forms. Interesting, looking at sort of what's on the TV these days. I think we're fortunate in Ireland that we have a relatively uncorrupt society, and perhaps there is some bribery going on, but in my experience, it's I think pretty well. Our democracy is pretty well delivered. There are issues. I don't know. Have you any thoughts on maybe how we're performing, or are there elements where we might perform a little better? Or
no, I think Ireland. I mean, again, globally, we're without getting complacent, we're probably not that bad in global terms. Like we did have scandals, obviously epic ones, going back in the 1980s and 90s around planning and so on and so forth, and we saw lots of the nexus there, the connection between politicians and builders and developers. There was undoubtedly pretty significant levels of corruption operating at a certain level. It's hard to know that looks like it's been very much tidied up, and that we really have got on top of that legislation has been a lot better with it. There was a resistance to forming an anti-corruption unit, a serious anti-corruption investigative entity that would deal with complaints from the public. We still don't have that. But you kind of think at this stage the kind of crude corruption, that maybe was associated with, say like with Charles Haughey and his government and he himself, as found by tribunals, that era is probably gone. But you'll always have some low level for sure, because the one thing about Ireland is because it's a small population, people know each other, so there are lots of personal connections and personal interconnections and elite interconnections between people, and so you create networks of influence. So it doesn't always have to be about money. It's just about who you know and my friend and you. So there may be elements of that. You can do a lot about that, but that's always going to happen, But I agree. I mean, we still have high levels of what we call trust, which is a big indicator of social cohesion. And you can do measures and surveys on trust, and trust in Ireland is still relatively good. So we still, for example, we still believe the education system delivers accurate exam results. It's not corrupted. We believe the medical system, once you get in there, is straightforward and will look after the best interests of the patient. It's got to do. There's a lot of social inequality in getting in. Of course, that's a big problem. We think the Gardaí are largely, you can trust the guards, or generally, although we've had scandals there, and we saw that with Maurice McCabe, lots of issues in the Gardaí. We've had banking scandals, all kinds. So we're not perfect, and we have had large problems, and we better not get too complacent. But because we've had so many problems, presumably the infrastructure is a lot better at the moment in terms of just monitoring and keeping an eye on all of that. We better hope, but one should. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. We go back to Lord Acton's great principle. So if the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, his idea is you distrust them all. Once you give power to someone, you should automatically distrust them, not because you're being cynical, but because that's how you defend liberty. So you assume that once you give people power, they will abuse it. That's the nature of power. And so you then work from that basis. You always keep people who have power in check, under scrutiny, highly accountable, and under rigorous questioning all the time. Not because you distrust them, although you probably should, but because of this corrupting nature of power. So once you have it, you should distrust it.
Well, that ties in wonderfully to the next topic, which is to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. I think, as you said, I think in general we have pretty good institutions, and I know personally over the last 20 years, I think a lot of the institutions that I would have been involved with have, in my opinion, improved hugely. The planning system, I think, even since I've been involved, I think has improved hugely. It has become more transparent. What would you be of a similar view, or?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah, I think there's been huge improvements. Yeah, I think there's more concern with structure and transparency in the current kind of jargon, and I think that's probably true. There's greater scrutiny of what goes on. You could argue we've almost gone too far in terms of kind of regulation and management of people in their practices. But I mean, again, we're never going to hit perfect. So perfect is not a human standard we can ever achieve. So we should never attack people for not being perfect, because none of us are perfect. We're never going to get there. But in terms of do they function, yeah, I think the basic, the Irish civil service, if you just start there, is probably very straight up and honest. The civil service, the public service then is probably got a very good ethic still built into it. That's my experience. I must say I've never seen otherwise. I have to say that. I've never seen otherwise. So I think we probably have a good ethic. Yeah.
So that kind of also ties into ensure responsive, inclusive, participatory, active decision making at all levels. I think, again, in my experience in the last 20 years, that has improved, and there is an appetite for it to improve politically as well.
Yeah. We've pioneered some pretty good innovations in Ireland with the citizens' assemblies as a model for how to do democratic planning, and that's been a pioneering feature of Ireland, and that has been very successful because citizen assemblies have come up with resolutions and proposals that politicians themselves would have been afraid of. So they've been, politicians often follow the people. Obviously, they're afraid to go too far out on a limb because they'll be cut off electorally. The citizen assemblies have been really striking because they've addressed very complex policy issues. They're chosen randomly, and then you give them expert advice and information, and then you trust them to come up with a solution. And largely they have, and they've come up with, you may not agree with it, but at least it's been a good process. And they've been sometimes very far in advance of what would have been possible politically. So we've seen citizen assemblies used really well to resolve complex issues, and they're in use now on the ecological and environmental issues as well, and are far more in advance of the current policy. So that's been a good thing. I mean, you always have to worry about ensuring that all voices are heard in a democracy. So we still have voices excluded. Travellers being the most notable. Irish travellers are still subject to incredible degrees of prejudice and exclusion, and we don't really hear their voices very much. And there isn't a proactive pro-traveller positive discrimination to really just kind of help the traveller community and traveller culture out of the problems that they have. And that's a huge issue, and especially at local government level, it's a huge issue. So even budgets allocated to traveller accommodation are often not spent by local authorities because politically they just won't do it, or still is a huge problem. So not all voices are heard, but we're certainly getting better at it. Now we have to be careful, of course, that we don't create a new consensus and a new received wisdom. So kind of contemporary Ireland is very liberal Ireland, and it's very politically correct Ireland, and that's fine. And most people are probably there in that space. But then there's other people who have different views on things, and we have to make sure those views get heard and are included and not, stigmatized. Because otherwise what happens is people then move to the extremes because it's the only place they can get audience. And so we have to look at how the far right get embedded within societies. Often it's made up of people who feel excluded and judged, and they go there because they think this is the vehicle for me to vent. So we have to be careful about consensus and what we understand by the only way to think about issues. But in general, I mean, these are good complaints. In general, I think I agree with you. I think it's been a positive story in Ireland for the last 20 years for sure.
Yeah. So the next one here, I think, perhaps more for our international politicians, but broaden and strengthen the participation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance.
Yeah.
I think is that a matter for our MEPs and our top level politicians, or is
it is, yeah. And again, it's back to some of the stuff we talked about earlier, Ireland's current place in the world. We were always an advocate for that. And we always had a key role there because we had a couple of features that allowed us to identify with countries in what used to be called the developing world, the southern world. We were a small country. That's the first thing. We're very weak. I mean, as a country, not very powerful. We're very wealthy, but traditionally we're kind of weak country in the sense we're not a big military superpower. We're not going to invade anyone. and so on. So we're not a threat in that sense. We're a weak country. So therefore, a country like Ireland needs international law, and it needs international cooperation. It doesn't want conflict, and it doesn't need superpower competition, because that threatens small countries. Small countries become very irrelevant when the big powers are in conflict with each other. So small countries naturally want there to be a rules-based international structure with a clear adherence to human rights and international law. So that we can legitimately speak on that. And also, even though we're part of Western Europe, and therefore, as I said earlier, part of the imperial center, we ourselves have been a colonized country. And our history is one of being colonized and invaded, with the consequential loss of culture and some indigenous perspectives and other damage to the indigenous culture as a result of that invasion. So we understand that experience also. So we're quite well placed to understand the Southern perspective on things for these two reasons, while we're also inside the Western world. So Ireland is has a really critical bridging role on the international stage and can speak with some authority. So we used our voice to really advocate for that in the last number of decades? Probably not. Though we have got onto the Security Council in the last couple of years, which again is testimony to the respect and the credibility of Irish position, and that's good, because you need a lot of support for that to happen as one of the revolving members. But we really need to be much more forthright around global justice, nuclear disarmament, demilitarization, global equality and development. We need a much stronger position on that. Because that's what the world needs now. So what we're looking at now in the world, as we've discussed before, and as the SDGs are trying to deal with, is a global ecological emergency on a scale beyond anything human cultures have faced before. So what do we do in the face of it? Now, business as usual won't work. So what is Ireland saying about the world of the mid-21st century? And we really don't have a credible and strong position on climate justice, on ecological reform. I mean, we say the usual pieties, but really, and our own internal policy, are we really adjusting to what we're facing with? I would say, if you listen to Eamon Ryan, he speaks really well on this, and I think his department has actually been quite a strong leader in terms of energy and transportation. But whether that links closely enough into what the Department of Foreign Affairs is doing is a different question. There are different parties and so on, but there's an opportunity there for Ireland, I think, to really be an important global citizen. So does the global South really determine anything? No. G7 is still where the power lies. It's made up of the big industrialized blocs. They basically decide global policy. Everyone else is excluded from that. The UN Security Council is top heavy with the big superpower winners of World War II. They've all got vetoes. So again, global democracy at the intergovernmental level is not a reality.
Yeah, very interesting, Mark. So I think we're nearly there now. There's a few targets here at the bottom. Provide legal identity, including birth registration. I think Ireland is doing pretty well on that. Ensure public access to information and protect fundamental freedoms in accordance with national legislation and international agreements. I think we're probably doing pretty well on that as well. Strengthen relevant national institutions for building capacity at all levels, in particular in developing countries, to prevent violence. I think, again, there's probably more for our international team. And the last one is promote and enforce non-discriminatory laws and policies for sustainable development. I think we have been doing a reasonably good job on that over the last few years. So that's the last one. If you want to make a comment on that, Mark, or indeed on a closing comment on the SDG 16 in itself.
No, I mean, it's a really, I mean, I think we've said that obviously, to be in favor of peace can be a piety. I mean, everyone's in favor of peace. Who isn't? Even an invader is generally in favor of peace. That's just the way it goes. It's an Orwellian construct. And often invaders say they're bringing peace. That's why they're invading. We're here to bring peace to your people. So we have to always be careful about this. And like it's in the hard moment of war and conflict that you really stand up for something. So I think we would like to see Ireland maybe, take a more assertive role here around a peaceful resolution of global conflicts. And there are so many. I mean, Ukraine is the one we're most fixed on because it's in Europe. But the Horn of Africa is really the most dreadful conflict that's been going on for some time, with huge displacement of people and vast amounts of violence. Conflict in Congo is endemic and very severe. Smaller places like Haiti is under, I know people living in Haiti. Haiti is a kind of awful, disintegrated society with endemic and chronic violence now and complete warlordism. Now it's geographically very far away from us, but so conflict and war is very severe globally, and we really need a peaceful world for sure. It's I know it's very aspirational and kind of hippie-ish, but I mean, without that, like, without that, what futures are there for people, for our children? I mean, for our grandchildren. So that is essential. So I think I think it's legitimate for us to argue that Ireland should be strongly taking a position in peace enforcement as opposed to just wistfully looking for peace. I mean, peace has to be actively done. You have to actively make it happen. That's our lesson from Northern Ireland. You have to make it happen. And there's none of this happening at the moment in the European conflict. And if not, we know war always escalates. That's the danger that we're in at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're right there, Mark. Well, thank you very much for those insights, and it's been great talking to you and listening to your insights on how this SDG is working for Ireland and how we might move forward with it. Thank you very much, Mark.
No problem. You're welcome, John. Take care.